I want to talk to you tonight about your net worth, and I want to start by telling you that your net worth was decided this morning. Not decided in some final, unchangeable way, decided the way a single brick decides a wall, one more piece stacked onto everything that came before it. What you did between 5 and 7 o'clock this morning either added to that wall or it didn't, and I want to show you tonight why that narrow little window, a window most people spend unconscious, is doing more to determine what you're worth on paper 20 years from now than almost any other decision available to you. Here's the sentence I want you to leave with. What you do at 5 a.m. determines your net worth. Not your job. Not your salary. Not even, in most cases, your education. What you do with the first 2 hours of a day that nobody is watching and nobody is paying you for. Now, some of you are already arguing with me in your head, and I understand why. You're thinking, Jim, my net worth is determined by my salary, my investments, the market, things far bigger than what I do at 5 in the morning. And you're not entirely wrong. But I want you to consider something. Salary is a result. Investments are a result. Even the market, over the long run, rewards a certain kind of behavior more than it rewards luck. And behind almost every one of those results, if you trace it back far enough, you'll find a habit, quietly repeated, usually in hours nobody else was watching. The 5 a.m. hour isn't magic. It's just the one part of the day still uncontested, still unclaimed by your boss, your children, your inbox, your obligations to everybody else's priorities. What you build there, or fail to build there, compounds in exactly the same way money compounds, and most people never once connect those two kinds of compounding, even though they're the same mechanism wearing two different disguises. Let's put some real numbers on this, because I've never once in 40 years convinced a room with a feeling that a spreadsheet couldn't convince faster. Say you use one focused hour every weekday morning, just one, not two, one, for something that actually builds your net worth. Could be building a skill that raises your income. Could be building a small side business. Could be, and I mean this quite literally, educating yourself on how money actually works, which most people never do in any structured way in their entire lives. 1 hour, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, is 250 hours annually. Over 10 years, that's 2,500 hours. Now here's the number that should stop you cold. The Malcolm Gladwells and researchers of the world will tell you it takes roughly 10,000 hours to reach real mastery in a skill. 2,500 hours, invested consistently before most people are even awake, gets you a full quarter of the way to mastery in 10 years, using time that the version of you sleeping until 7 has simply never spent on anything at all. And mastery, in almost every field I've studied, is the single most reliable predictor of income there is. Not talent. Not connections. Hours, deliberately spent, compounding quietly while the rest of the world slept through them. Here's why the morning specifically matters for building wealth, and it's not just about the extra time, though the extra time matters plenty. It's about what kind of decisions you're capable of making at 5 in the morning versus what kind of decisions you're capable of making at 9 at night. Building net worth, real net worth, requires a very specific kind of thinking. Patient, unemotional, willing to delay gratification, willing to do unglamorous work today for a payoff you won't see for years. That kind of thinking lives in a rested, uncluttered mind. It does not live in a mind that spent all day making decisions, absorbing stress, reacting to other people's emergencies. By 9 at night, when most people finally sit down to think about their financial future, if they think about it at all, their decision-making capacity has been spent on everything else the day demanded. That's why so many financial decisions made in the evening are impulsive, emotional, reactive. A purchase to feel better after a hard day, a decision to skip the budget review because you're too tired to face it. The 5 a.m. version of you is a completely different decision maker than the 9 p.m. version of you, and net worth, more than almost anything else in life, is built by the 5 a.m. version. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Renata Cole, though I've changed her name because the lesson matters more than she does. Renata worked as a dental hygienist, good steady income, nothing spectacular, married with one daughter, and for the first 12 years of her career she lived, by her own description, paycheck to paycheck in a way that had nothing to do with how much she earned and everything to do with how she thought about money, which was mostly that she didn't think about it at all until a bill was due. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't foolish. She simply never had time to sit down and actually understand where her money went, what her retirement accounts were doing, whether she was on track for anything, because by the time she got home from work, made dinner, helped with homework, and got her daughter to bed, she had nothing left in the tank for anything that required real concentration, and financial planning requires real concentration. I met Renata after a talk I gave at a community center, one of those free evening seminars, and she came up afterward, a little embarrassed, and told me she was 34 years old and had never once, in her entire adult life, calculated her own net worth. Didn't know the number. Wasn't even sure how you'd calculate it. I asked her a question I ask a lot of people in her position. I said, Renata, If I asked you to name 1 hour this week where you sat down, alone, with a clear head, and thought seriously about your financial future, could you name one? She thought about it for a long time, and finally she said, Jim, I don't think that hour has ever existed in my whole life. Every hour I have is already spoken for by somebody or something else. I told her about the 5 a.m. hour that night, the same thing I'm telling you now, and I gave her one very specific assignment, because vague advice rarely survives contact with a real life. I told her, for the next 90 days, get up 1 hour earlier than you currently do. Just 1 hour, Renata, nothing heroic, and before anything else, before coffee, before your phone, spend that hour on exactly one task, understanding your own money. Some mornings that meant reading a book on personal finance. Some mornings it meant actually opening the retirement account statements she'd been letting arrive unopened for years. Some mornings it meant building, line by line, an honest budget for the first time in her adult life. Renata told me later that the first 2 weeks were miserable. She was tired, she resented the alarm, and more than once she almost quit before 6 a.m. even arrived. But she kept the appointment with herself, the way you'd keep an appointment with a doctor, because she told me she would, and something in her didn't want to come back and admit she hadn't. By the end of those 90 days, Renata had done something she'd never done in 12 years of working. She had calculated her actual net worth for the first time, sat with a number, which she told me was a good deal lower and more precarious than she'd let herself imagine, and instead of letting that number crush her the way it crushes most people who finally look, she used those morning hours to build an actual plan against it. She renegotiated a high-interest debt she'd been carrying quietly for 6 years. She increased her retirement contribution by a percentage that felt uncomfortably small when she did the math, but that she now understood, for the first time, would compound into real money over the decades she had left to work. She started, in the 91st morning, a very small side income doing dental consulting for a local practice management company, an opportunity she found simply because she was finally awake enough, and clear-headed enough, in the early morning to notice it existed. I talked to Renata about 3 years after that community center talk. In those 3 years, using nothing but that one reclaimed hour every weekday morning, her net worth had moved more than it had in the previous 12 years combined, not because her salary had dramatically changed, though the side consulting work had added meaningfully, but because she had finally spent enough clear, undistracted hours actually managing what she already had instead of letting it drift on autopilot, while she was too depleted to look at it. She told me something I still think about. She said, Jim, I used to think I didn't have enough money to worry about. What I actually didn't have was enough clear-headed hours to understand the money I already had. Those are 2 completely different problems, and I'd been solving the wrong one my whole adult life. I want you to sit with what Renata said, because it's the whole lesson in one sentence. She didn't think she had a money problem. She had a clarity problem, and clarity, more than almost anything else, is what net worth actually requires. You cannot build wealth you don't understand. You cannot invest money you've never sat still long enough to track. You cannot negotiate a raise, start a side business, cut a wasteful expense, or make a single intelligent financial decision using a mind that's already spent everything it had on everybody else's demands by the time it finally sits down to think about money. The 5 a.m. hour isn't valuable because it's extra time. It's valuable because it's the only time most working adults have left where their mind is clear enough to actually think about the thing that matters most to their long-term security, and almost nobody uses it for that, because almost nobody realizes that's what it's for. Let me answer the objection I know some of you are forming right now, because I hear a version of it every time I give this talk. You're thinking, Jim, I already know how to get up early. I've read every article on morning routines there is. Cold showers, journaling, meditation, a glass of water with lemon in it. I've tried all of it, and my net worth hasn't moved an inch. And if that's you, I want to tell you something important, because you are describing a very real and very common trap. A morning routine is not the same thing as a net worth building hour, and most of what gets marketed as morning routines these days is, frankly, wellness theater. It feels productive. It photographs well. And it does almost nothing for the actual number on your balance sheet, because none of it is aimed at money at all. You can meditate for 30 years and never once increase your net worth by $1, and that's not a criticism of meditation, it's simply an honest accounting of what that hour is and isn't for. The 5 a.m. hour I'm describing tonight is not a wellness hour. It is a working hour, aimed with real specificity at a financial outcome, and the two should never be confused, because one of them changes how you feel and the other one changes what you're worth. So let's talk about what this looks like for you, starting tomorrow morning, because a lesson without an action attached to it is just an interesting thing you heard once. First, before you do anything else with a reclaimed early hour, I want you to know your actual number. Most of you listening to me right now, like Renata, do not know your own net worth, and I mean that as a simple fact, not an accusation. You cannot build what you cannot see. Assets minus liabilities. Everything you own minus everything you owe. Write it down, even if the number embarrasses you, especially if the number embarrasses you, because an honest number you can build against will always beat a comfortable ignorance you can't. Second, pick the one thing your early hour is going to build, and I want you to be specific the way Renata was specific. Not get better with money in some vague, general sense. A skill that raises your income. A side income stream with an actual name and shape. A debt with an actual payoff date attached to it. One thing, aimed at your net worth specifically, not a general feeling of self-improvement that never quite turns into a number on a balance sheet. Third, protect that hour the way you'd protect a meeting with your bank, because that's essentially what it is. No phone first. No email first. The work first, on the one thing, before anything else gets to interrupt the clearest hour of thinking you're going to have all day. The moment you let the phone in first, you've handed your clearest hour to somebody else's priorities, and you'll never get it back that day. Fourth, track the compounding the same way you track an investment account, because that's exactly what it is. Every 90 days, do what Renata did at the end of her first 90, sit down and look at the actual number, not the feeling, the number. Net worth doesn't move in a straight line, and some quarters will feel disappointing. That's fine. That's how compounding always looks up close, slow and almost invisible, right up until it isn't. Here's something else I want you to notice about this whole approach. Nobody around you can see your 5 a.m. hour. Your coworkers don't know if you spent this morning reading a finance book or scrolling your phone for an extra hour of sleep. Your family doesn't see the retirement statement you finally opened at 5:40 this morning. This is completely invisible work, the same way it was invisible for Renata for 3 straight years, right up until the results stopped being invisible, and people started asking her, sometimes with a little suspicion in their voice, how she'd managed to turn things around so completely in such a short time. She never had a satisfying answer for them, because the real answer was almost embarrassingly simple. She just got up an hour earlier and thought clearly about money while everybody else was still asleep. And understand the compounding on this the same way you'd understand compounding in an investment account, because it behaves identically. 2,500 hours over 10 years, aimed specifically at your net worth instead of spent unconscious or spent on things that don't move that number, will produce a result that looks, from the outside, like luck, or like a lucky break, or like Renata's neighbors eventually assumed, some secret windfall nobody talked about. It was never a windfall. It was 2,500 hours that everybody else had access to and almost nobody used. So here's what I want you to do, starting tonight. Set your alarm 1 hour earlier than you currently wake, not heroically early, just 1 honest hour earlier than your current habit. Tomorrow morning, before your phone, before coffee, sit down and calculate your actual net worth if you don't already know it, and decide the one specific thing that hour is going to build going forward. Protect that hour tomorrow the way you'd protect a meeting with your own future, because that's precisely what it is. Most of you are not going to do this. I've given this talk in enough rooms to know exactly how it plays out. Most people will feel something tonight, maybe even set the alarm with real intention, and by Thursday they'll be back to the old wake time, telling themselves they'll start again once things calm down, and things, as I've said for 40 years, never calm down on their own. That's their choice, and I understand it, because change of any kind is expensive before it ever pays a single dividend back. But some of you are going to set that alarm tonight and mean it. Some of you are going to sit down tomorrow morning and calculate a number you've been avoiding for years, the way Renata finally did. And a few years from now, you and I are going to cross paths again, and you're going to tell me your net worth moved more in those few years than it had in the entire decade before, and when I ask you how, you're going to say the same thing Renata said. You just got up an hour earlier and thought clearly about money while everybody else was still asleep. That's the whole message tonight, so don't let it slide past you the way you've let so many mornings slide past you before. What you do at 5 a.m. determines your net worth, not because the hour is magic, but because it's the only hour left in most working lives where the mind is clear enough to actually build something instead of merely surviving the day. Know your number. Protect the hour. Aim it at one thing. And let it compound. If tonight's message hit home, tell me in the comments whether you actually know your own net worth right now, off the top of your head. I read every single one of them, and I promise more of you are in Renata's position than you'd like to admit. And if you want more of this kind of straight talk on the habits that actually move your financial life instead of just talking about it, subscribe to Legacy Mindset, because this is exactly the work we do here every single week. Now go set that alarm.